Hi everyone, welcome to Last Book Alive. Today I'm joined by my friend Dr. Denise Rodrigues, and she is a homeopath and also so many other things that she'll talk about just now. But me and Denise are talking about Study for Obedience by Sarah Bernstein, which was shortlisted for this year's Booker Prize. And at that bookstore on a day when it was shut, and I'm going to tell the story now, Denise. She told the story in the first take. I'm going to tell the story, and our eyes locked. We should be friends. And we connected over books. And I think Denise, I'm going to hand it over to Denise because I think she tells the story much better. But welcome, Denise. Thank you so much for joining me, and thank you for taking the time to read this book.
Hello, everyone. I am so happy to be doing this today with Meher, which, as she said, our eyes locked and we instantaneously decided we should be friends. That's how we met at the bookstore. I'm Dr. Denise Rodrigues, a homeopath, counselor, pediatric nutritionist, and now a certified narrative therapy practitioner, all of which I bring into my healing space. I practice at a clinic, Evolve Homeopathy Clinic, my own space in South Goa. I also practice in Panjim. So Meher and I met in Panjim on a Friday after I decided I wanted to go to the bookstore. And then we went for coffee. And when Meher told me she has this podcast, I was so excited. I was like, no, I want to be on one. I want to be on one podcast. I want to read a book with her. And when she suggested we would read Study for Obedience, it was such an intriguing title in the first place. And I was very excited to know that it was not only long-listed but short-listed for this year's Booker Prize. And to read it really meant something. Because of which Meher and I decided, okay, we would take our time and bring into this space something of what we've been reading for the past maybe 1.5 weeks, right, Meher?
Yeah. So before we get into the discussion, I wanted to just give a little bit of an overview about the book. So this book basically begins with a young woman arriving in a town, and she's there to basically take care of her brother and take care of his house after her brother's wife and children have left him. This town describes as the town of her forebears, which is a town of her ancestors who then had to flee. And now her brother lives there in this huge mansion. And as we find out, it's actually the mansion where the people who persecuted her family used to live. The book begins with her arriving into the town, and as the story progresses, we start to understand her complicated relationship with her brother, and then her tense and hostile relationship with the townsfolk. But to give, I wanted to give what makes the story stand apart, because this is kind of a usual, what the summary I provided is kind of very usual. So what makes the story stand out is the narrator herself. And so she is a very unusual woman in the sense that she's had a very unusual upbringing. Or I wouldn't say unusual, but it's the thing that stood out for me, which is that she has learned not to make anyone. So we actually perceive her as somebody who's very submissive, but her family has used guilt and manipulation to keep her in their control. And her only purpose, as she says, is to serve her family and to serve her siblings. And she's the youngest one, right? And the way that she basically copes with this is that she retreats into herself. And so a lot of what this book is an internal monologue. And we are able to then understand what the narrator is talking about, her experiences, and the way that she justifies other people's actions. I just wanted to give, I'm going to just reread this, Denise, maybe shorten it a little bit. Just to give the audience a sense of who she is and what we are reading, just to give them a sense of that. Here's an excerpt. I had never been able to live in my life, which is not to say I tried to live in anyone else's, merely that from a young age I was heedful. I took instruction easily and tried to live according to the narrative made available to me. With this latter point, I struggled. I had difficulty, for instance, understanding my life in terms of the hero's journey. That, according to a documentary I'd seen on television in my early teens, characterized the myths and legends that themselves form the basis of the narratives by which many nations, religions, ethnic groups, tribes, families, and even individual people understood themselves. In the first place, I was evidently not the main character, had never been of the journeying kind, and neither could I understand myself as guide or magical helper along the way. For frankly, what good was I to anyone? So this is like a very this is just the gist of it. A lot of the book is about her being self-deprecating, about her almost like laying down her life in the service of her brother or to appease the townspeople. So yeah, and so she has this desperate need for approval, but she also knows that all her attempts at getting this approval in the past have proven to be a failure, and so she predicts that even in the future they will prove to be a failure. And even the townspeople think so, and they actually see her as somebody who's sinister, and they see her as a threat. And why is that? Why do they see her as that? Like what? So actually, when she arrives, a series of unfortunate events happen, right? The animals that start to die. And in the country, this is a big deal because livestock is one of the primary ways in which people earn their keep. So when the livestock starts to die, and then she decides to make these grass dolls, like these really witchy grass dolls, and to leave them at people's doorsteps, and that really alarms them, right? Because these are country folk, and we're led to believe that they are close-minded in some ways.
Yeah.
So this is the basic gist of it. Now, Denise, once again, can you please share what did you think about this book, and also specifically, why do you think this young woman almost takes pleasure in being so servile and submissive?
Oh, well, that's a good question. Because all her life she has lived in wanting to please others. Like you said, there was a need for validation. Maybe it was because like I mentioned earlier when we did our first take, is about she was always projected as the good student, the good person, somebody to look out for. And by her teachers, when she learned German, when she learned Italian, and how she did well in class, and what her peers, were all around, what they felt against her. And I think that place where she wanted to be accepted is, uh, and she felt that the only way to get that validation was to be of service, because that was how her mind was molded, she being the youngest of several siblings in between. And the brother in question, who she goes to, is like the oldest of the lot. So she was always doing things for them, and they always told her how she should be living her life, even when it came to not speaking out what she felt and not speaking her mind. She was guilted, shamed, and reprimanded even for speaking out what she felt. And over a period of time, as we see in the book, she kept it all suppressed, all inside, all of it inside. And she just felt that, okay, as long as I'm in service, as long as I'm obedient, as long as I'm obedient. And she, there was a deep need for a reward of that obedience. Like when you spoke about, she kept those rat dolls. It was out of love, I feel, where she made those grass dolls and kept it at people's homes. Because again, it was this need of acceptance, about wanting to feel validated by the townspeople, even when she signs up for being a farmhand, of course. That's what it is in the farm. To work in the barn, to work in the barn. So I feel that also was a need for validation. She said as long as she felt she was doing service for the good of the other by suppressing who she was, that means she would be validated and she would be accepted. And that's how she has lived her entire life. If you see the narrative, where it starts from her childhood, how it started, everywhere it is like, as long as I am doing this, as long as I'm in service, you know, that's how she would feel happy. And even when thoughts came later on in the book, as the book progresses, I don't know if we could already reach that part when she actually begins to tell her brother what he needs to do in terms of, when he falls ill. That is the time we see that there is a spot of a growth in her character, literally towards the last 5 pages. Literally. Where, she's putting her foot down as to what her brother needs to do.
Yeah. So my question to you, Denise, would be: do you see her only as a do you see her only as a victim, or when you were reading this, and what you mentioned that you felt heavy. What was that heaviness like? Was it a sense of grief or sadness for her? Was that I mean, how did you perceive her? Did you empathize with her, or did she also kind of, because she kind of alienated me. How did you feel? Like, actually,
My heart
let me
went out
explain how
to her.
I felt, and then let me ask if you agree with it, because I think I have to explain that to you,
Yeah.
actually, what I mean. So so in response to what you said, which is that, she is dominated over by her family, I actually thought that when I was reading this, I also felt heavy. But I also felt like I was not able to completely empathize with her, because I could not I could not empathize with her completely, and I could not trust her completely. I could not trust her suffering completely. And because I felt like the novel also alienated me as a reader, and so I didn't know how to even review it, like, because it was like I wanted to empathize with her. I did, and I did at some point, but the way that she herself kind of rejected herself, it made it very difficult for me to do that consistently. And it was almost like, as I told you, I don't want harm to come to her, but there's a certain detachment in her from her own situation, and I'm afraid that I'll be cruel to her. It's almost like I feel like in throughout the narrative we see people being cruel to her, we see her accepting it, but in this acceptance, I don't know, I felt like what she was saying was that the way that she was, it kind of evoked people's cruelty, and I could not understand why she took it, why she accepted that, and she continued to accept it, until at a point at which I started to think that maybe it's her revenge. Her compliance is her revenge. So what do you think?
I think I differ a bit on that. Okay, because all throughout the book, what I felt is the constant ruminations, like I mentioned earlier. The whole book is all about the ruminations, which came out.
Yeah.
Is there is a lot of self-victimization, with all the thoughts that are being put. I felt very deeply for the character. I felt very sad. I felt like maybe she's genuinely not able to connect because of what she has faced, because she was expected to be a certain way. She was made to be a certain way. So even if she wanted to kind of come out of that shell or be open to people, she was only faced with hostility. And I think later on in the book, when we do speak about when she makes those talismans and put it at the doorsteps of people, she genuinely tried to be a part of a collective, to be a part of a community. But as you mentioned earlier, there was a lot of close-mindedness in the townsfolk, which may have again pushed her. So I personally believe people are always their lived experiences. So a lot of how she was reacting, a lot of how she was responding in the book is because of what had happened to her in the childhood. And as she was about wanting to make that connection, still she was met with hostility. Still. So, I mean, in spite of her efforts, in spite of her, irrespective of even in one scene of the book where she personally witnesses the villagers, the townsfolk, conducting a sort of ritual to bury the grass dolls that she made, the talismans that she made.
Yeah.
It is mentioned that she still showed up at the barn. She still says that I still showed up at the barn for work. She still went there. She still wanted to kind of, maybe that need for acceptance is so strong in her. And the last, what it ends with, I think the last bit where it says, the last bit, what right, what reason did they have, one's ancestors, to flee into the forest? Page 186. Cross the water,
Mm.
peddle rags, go to school. What was it all for? But in the final analysis, one was never meant to survive. What was left? And was it enough to carry on? But we began to weary of this line, do we not? Because here, after all, we are. So she really tried, and that's where my heart goes out for her.
Mm.
And I
So for
empathize
me, like
whole.
yeah, I didn't like her. I didn't trust her. Because even though she was see, the narrative is like there's this layer of like her trying to gain acceptance, but I also think, I don't know, I sense a little bit of revulsion in her for her brother as well as for the townsfolk, you know, like she's kind of ingratiating herself with them, but I don't trust that all of her intentions are good, like why, like, for instance, like, after everything that has happened, she goes into the cafe,
Yeah.
right? Do you remember the cafe scene? She goes into the cafe and she's like making she asks for coffee and everybody's extremely quiet and very wary of her, and then the salt falls and then she basically throws the salt over her thing and the people freak out. So I don't know. Like, I feel like if somebody knows how much they are causing revulsion, why would they put themselves over and over in the same situation, right? So I felt like I found her fascinating because I felt like she was not. Uh, I didn't trust that she was completely like an innocent kind of victim. I felt like she also got some amount of control by being compliant. Some
Mhm.
There was some control that she got. Yeah, so
Mhm.
what do you think about that? Like the control that she
Could
had,
be,
like,
could be. And also there were parts in the book, yeah, it could be the control because I really don't remember which chapter, which page it was where she felt like again when she spoke about the ancestors, I believe, where you know she wanted to feel one of them. She didn't want to feel oppressed being a part of that community. And still, the actions, whatever was going on, were just getting a lot of thing. And maybe she felt that she wanted to be in power. There were instances where she compared her thoughts to what her brother might be thinking. I think that's what you are referring to. Her thoughts to what her brother might be thinking as well.
yeah,
And why she felt her brother wanted to be a part of the community, for example. And also, certain places, I don't know how much of it was really a fragment of her imagination. Also, yes, it was a
mm,
monologue, like you say, a lot of ruminations. But,
yeah,
especially when she sees that lady show up with the dog in the garden, she has no
yeah,
clue where the lady showed up from and continuously seeing that lady. So at a certain point, it made me think whatever atrocities or so that she said she faced from the townspeople, was it even real? It makes you at one
yeah,
point, you feel my heart goes out to the character because of the way it is and the kind of person she has become because of the way she's responding due to her lived experiences. And then at one part where it is mentioned that she sees this lady and the dog walking towards the hill, and she's not, she passes by them, but they don't even acknowledge her, nor does the
mm,
dog, nor does the lady. So what was that? I mean, there were fragments in the book which made me think like, is this a part of what? Like where?
okay. Yeah, yeah. So I'm so glad that you touched upon that, Denise, because I felt heavy while reading this book, but I also felt frustrated. So like one of the things is like I literally have written uh I became so frustrated with the narrator that, like, with her sense of reality, that wrote, I get over yourself. When she goes into the shop and is unable to communicate with the shopkeeper, I was just like, like, I was,
How?
like I said, that I felt really bad, but like, and so, but coming back to what you were saying, like, there's this kind of, you go into, so I read an interview of Bernstein's, and so she basically, this is what she said in an interview with Public Books. Huh? She says, I envisioned the shape of the narrative as a kind of closed spiral that moves towards a center, a reason, an explanation, but never finds it. And I feel like this is what you're saying, like that both you and I felt this sense of frustration, I feel, because we were like, where is this headed, in a sense, like, you know, it's a spiral that just goes and then it just leaves you nowhere. Like it's just we follow her train of thought, but that train of thought doesn't really lead us to any kind of conclusion, so any kind of closure, anything, any kind of understanding, really. It's just, this is the way that things are, or, you know.
These are her thoughts.
So
These are her thoughts, plain and simple.
yeah,
What happens in the end when she goes to the church and sees everybody in white? I mean, I was so intrigued, and I'm like, 3 pages left, just 3 pages left, and we don't know what's going to happen. What she actually thinks, what's going to. There's nothing. Whether the brother lives, whether there's no closure to the book.
So yeah, and I think, and yet the book holds you, right? Like, I don't know, like I mean, it's not one of those books which is like a page turner, like who done it kind of things, but it still held me, you know. And I think it's beautifully written, right? Like the way that she articulates her thoughts, the narrator, it's very beautiful. It doesn't go anywhere, but it's very beautiful to read, you know. So I don't know, I feel like it's one of those books which I don't know if I'll ever reread it, but I think I would have to reread it to understand it.
To understand
was
the purpose of it.
Sorry?
To understand the whole purpose of it and the meaning of the book in general, you know.
Yeah. Was there any book that this particular book reminded you of, or anything that anything that you connected from this book with the outside world? Any book or anything else? Any film?
No, not that I can actually think of, but just basically, it first of all, there were a lot of things which I had to kind of look up. I'll be very honest. Like, you know, I think there was a dish mentioned, and then I came to know this person is of a Jewish descent, and you know, and you feel you've read about it in history. I mean, you know that Jews as a community, they did face oppression, and we know what's happening right now. The oppression people are facing, and how are they responding in times of oppression, in times like these. So it just made me, I think I just thought about that, but I didn't really, no book or no, nothing, but just a lot of news facts came in my mind, a lot of history came in my mind. A lot of stuff like, I mean, you know, thinking about the atrocities Jews faced earlier, all that came in my mind as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I also was wondering like about Bernstein's own like standpoint with regard to what's happening in Gaza, because she does talk a lot about oppression and persecution in this book, right? I mean, she references it as she references so many things. She also references this, but in a way that's, we understand the sinister aspect of it, what happened to them, and then how they're being perceived as again, as she's being perceived as suspicious, and, you know, almost like, I think, a witch, although she doesn't say it, but something related to the occult. But Denise, one thing like this, so why I asked you the question of whether it connected with anything that you had read previously is because when I read this book, I immediately thought of The Castle by Franz Kafka, which so if for, you know, The Castle is actually one of the books that that Kafka wrote, and it's basically about this land surveyor called K. That's his name, and he is trying to get to the castle, and that's the book. That it's his attempt to get to the castle, and that also is, I would say, it's a frustrating read, and I say frustrating in the sense that one expects something and it doesn't happen, and so it's like a maze of a person trying to get to the castle. So it's basically a kind of, when it came out, it was looked at as a critique of the bureaucracy and all of that. But I wanted to read a little bit of it, just a para, just to give you a sense of what I'm talking about. Because the townspeople particularly reminded me of the townspeople in this town where Kay lives, where the castle is. Okay. No sooner had Kay entered the room that the rustics, the townspeople, rose to come closer to him. It had become a habit of theirs to follow him around. "What is it you keep wanting from me?" cried Kay. They did not take offense, but turned slowly back to their places. One said, by way of explanation as he turned away, but with an inscrutable smile copied by some of the others in the saloon bar, "We're always hearing something new," and he licked his lips as if the new was something delicious to eat. Kay said not a word to smooth things over. It would be good for them to feel a little respect for him. But no sooner was he sitting beside Barnabas, his assistant, that he felt one of the locals breathing down the back of his neck. The man said he had come to fetch the salt cellar, but Kay stamped his foot angrily and he went away without it. So this is like a little bit of a comedy, but the absurd nature of the dislike or the tension between the townspeople and Kay is something that I found even here, the alienation that the townspeople feel with her. Because if we just look at her actions, as you said, she's just trying to fit in as a new person. And yet she's met with this unintelligible kind of hatred and suspicion. So that's why I felt like it was similar. But yeah, anything else that you wanted to talk about in this that stood out for you? Like one thing actually I want to ask you is, have you read any book like this?
No, not in recent times, and never in just a monologue. I mean, I tell you now that it was quite a heavy read, first of all, with the words, with the, there are many long-ish sentences where you need to keep reading back to make sense of what was said, because again, this is just a flow of thoughts, just like thoughts and thoughts and thoughts, and you don't know where it started and where it ended and from which point it went to, where. And it's the first time ever, basically, I'm reading a book like this with no dialogue, with no names of character, names of place. I mean, I went on thinking, okay, what is this northern country? I actually was thinking, which is the northern country? First, I thought, like, where exactly? Where were the Jews expelled from? Which are the countries? So it made me think on that in that ground. Yeah.
Okay. I don't have that many notes on this as such, but I also thought that this was a close study of hate and the parts of ourselves that we keep hidden. So there's an element of self-hatred. There's an element of keeping oneself small and contained, not to disturb others. But I felt that she also hated her brother. I also felt that she hated the townspeople. What do you think?
And what
you got that?
I mean, it's like, yeah.
Yeah. So
I think,
I'll
maybe.
like this particular, like, because of her observation, like what she says. So she says, "I tended to be deferential, basically meek, tugging at the proverbial forelock until all my hair fell out. This attitude presented its own set of problems, namely, that meekness brings out the sadist in people, the atavistic desire to bite at the heels of the runt of the litter."
Yes.
So she recognizes that people are malicious, and the more that she suppresses herself and the more that she doesn't speak, that people become sadists, which is why I said I want to also be cruel to her, because she brings out that feeling of cruelty, like, and that's why I'm saying it's a study of hate, because we understand even in ourselves, as I read this book, that as human beings, if given the chance, and if there were no kind of societal hindrances, how far would we go if we were given free reign of another person? And
exactly.
How would we treat
And yeah, and basically, again, when we read that paragraph about the runt of the litter, and I think she identified herself as a weak person. And what I termed earlier as maybe, her character grew, but it also could be like, it made me think, actually, now that we're talking about it, when her brother started falling ill, she never contacted a doctor. It made
No, she didn't.
she did not contact the doctor when he fell ill, and he was only deteriorating, and she just took matters in her hand. She even, there's a mention, now that you bring it up, she confiscated his phone. And that is when that malicious nature of hers actually began to show, which I felt was, okay, her character is growing. Now she's speaking up for herself. She's taking his phone, she's not allowing him to do the things where, there came a point where her brother locked himself in the room
Mm-hmm.
and did not want the windows open. He was trying to contact a doctor, a modern medicine doctor, and she even stopped that.
Yeah.
And then we don't know what happened.
But she did it all in the service of
All
her brother.
in the service, it was
From
put
her
like,
perspective.
I am doing good, and I was trained not to keep the doors and windows closed. So why should it be closed? Like, it went to a point where it was weird, where she takes the mirror to see her brother till he falls asleep and he's breathing. You know, that now I get it. Where the character, you want to keep a distance from the character rather than fully empathizing with the character, right? I get you.
Do you think that she is innocent, whatever that means to you? Do you think that she is an innocent victim in this?
Mm, earlier on, I feel yes. I still feel I will hold on to the fact because how many years of being choked would anybody be able to take? Sooner or later, it's going to come out, right? The longer your soul feels suppressed, the longer you feel trapped, it's just going to come out. And
Mm-hmm.
um, that's what I felt for this character. So
So the other
no
question.
matter yeah. So no matter even though she's a victim or the innocent victim or she didn't know, I think somewhere she wanted to show her agency and autonomy, when it came to confiscating her brother's phone, telling him what to do, not even contacting the doctor.
Mm. Do you think do you think that a victim, like I also, like I was another part, like I was reading an interview, but like Bernstein says, that oftentimes when we talk about victims, we
Hmm.
always ascribe innocence to them in order to justify their victimhood.
Yes, yes,
And
I
I
read that
feel,
interview as well. I read that interview as well. So
yeah.
why should it be that? I mean, I think Bernstein had that question as well. Why should it be like when a person is in a victim, why should it be just innocence? And what is innocence really? It makes you think, no?
Mm,
It makes you think because you can think from both sides. You can think of the oppression,
yeah.
what this person's facing, as well as how the person ought to have responded and how she is responding.
Mm, yeah.
So kind
Yeah,
of
I
in the
feel
fence
like,
on that one.
yeah. Yeah, I feel like this, I mean, even still, after Me Too and all of that, even now, like there's this aspect of innocence, which is always brought to question, which is always brought to light when we talk about any kind of violence that is done to people. Like there's this almost like you have to justify the victimhood. And I feel like this book complicates it, and not just towards the end, but even as she's talking, I feel like she actually, the reason why I don't see her as an innocent victim, which is a good thing, is that I feel like she sees people, and I feel like she sees the intention, and despite that she goes ahead and plays the role that she does. So she's very intelligent and she's very perceptive. Like she knows, like even her brother, like she is able to see her brother as a human being. She's devoted to him, but she also understands that he is like a little bit of a kind of a megalomaniac or a control freak or something. Like we do understand, we do get that. She does communicate that to us, like what she is seeing. So I think that she has a very like a distant way of looking at people, but a very clear assessment of who they are as people and how they're going to respond. And then she
Correct.
plays her role,
She
like
plays her role. I mean,
so,
knowing how the villagers are, she still takes a stand of those dolls. I mean, that is, of course, it was a gift, but driving midnight. I was riding on the cycle midnight, 12, 3, 4, and there was instances made to who would be awake at that ungodly hour, and when she was the one actually going and
Yeah.
putting those
Yeah.
talismans and leaving them
Yeah.
wherever. But also she attributes it to aspects like even the salt which she put over the back. She attributes
Her
it to
Jewish
so-called
heritage.
muscle memory. Yes.
Mm.
So then again, you're kind of sitting on the fence, you know?
Mm. And also like I feel like this the way that this book is written is kind of stuck in time. Like I know that it's modern day because we're talking about mobile phones and things like that, but the way that it's written, I almost feel like it's some distant medieval town with like the way that she uses
Yes, strange
ancestors, and the
practices.
language is very it's a language that I feel like it's partly fairy tale-ish, like it's folk. It's like a folk
Yes,
tale almost, like a little bit,
yes.
but in parts. I don't know. Um, yeah. And so last, I guess the last, and also like just in connection to like how she sees people clearly. Even her, she's working for an oil company, which is basically
Yes.
accused of human rights abuses.
Correct.
So, but she's still working for them. So she's not like also very practical in some ways, like, not like completely lost or something like that. So, I think that helps to root her in reality. Yeah, anything else you wanted to add, Denise?
No, nothing else because like we mentioned earlier, there are so many layers to the character. I would definitely when I'm in a more empty space of mind, I would give this a read, not because it's quite heavy, but like I mentioned, just to understand the whole message or the purpose of this book, or what exactly the author, or is it just a tale? Is it just a story? Or is it just something where we need to, in the face of what's happening in Gaza and what's happening with the world and how the world is responding? Is this calling us to be more compassionate, more empathizing, more what to people who are facing oppression because of a very panoptic view of things, a very stereotypical way of how things are seen? Like when we began about this book, we spoke about how women are expected to behave, or about how certain cultures need to carry
Hmm.
on all of this.
Hmm. Yeah. So I guess my last question would be, what does the word obedience mean to you?
Yes.
Actually, before that, I have one more question.
We go with the first
You
question.
said you said that you had recently become a practitioner of narrative healing,
Therapy. Narrative
healing therapy,
therapy.
narrative therapy.
Yes,
Uh, did that in any way help you connect with the book
so much.
more?
So much
Okay,
of it when we are
talk a little bit
speaking
about
about.
that.
Yeah. So especially, the part, I think the part which you started on page 82,
Yeah.
I had seen on television in my early teens characterize the myths and legends that themselves form the basis of the narratives by which many nations, religions, ethnic groups, tribes, families, and even individual people understood themselves. So people are basically seeing themselves through a particular lens. It could be through history, like even the people in the book, the townsfolk, are responding her to this narrator through the lens of history, through the lens of the culture she comes from, always treating her like an outsider. And how are people responding? They're basically responding according to their religious upbringing, their belief systems, what they're rooted in, their thought process, their ethnicities. So we construct stories of our lives based on our lived experiences, because everybody is a story. Meher, you are a story, I'm a story, and you have way so much travel experience and lived experience, and so much. I remember a so exciting conversation which would have probably gone on for 2 3 days at a stretch if we,
For sure.
you know. But what do people actually bring? And how are they influenced? How do the cultures influence? How do they create those ideas about themselves? And I think this book is so heavily influenced by, even in this modern times when you have a thermostat regulating temperature in her brother's house, where you have access to YouTube, where you have access to all the modern amenities, and you still have the townspeople responding through a narrative lens based on history, based on, certain culture, certain, yeah. So it made me think, how are we to respond? That is why I may have overemphasized with the character, because how are we to respond when she is actually being oppressed, even though she tried to reach out, even though, she may have had sinister motives or whatever, you know.
So narrative, please say that again. Narrative healing.
Therapy, narrative
Nar
practices,
Narrative practices therapy is about understanding a person through their lived reality.
lived
That's
experiences, through the stories, through, maybe it could be through a lens of history, a lens of religion, a lens of various ways of what shape us. Because
mhm.
every culture, okay, every culture shapes us in a different way. I mean, you have lived in Goa for some time. I moved from Bombay to Goa, and I know how the experience, or how I was shaped in Bombay, and how I'm still being shaped as an individual here in Goa. How do we respond to the cultures here? I mean, but those are stories that we collect over time and that shape us, right?
That's so fascinating because that brings that's actually another aspect of it is then how does the sense of place affect this character? How does her journey through the place and through town and through her interaction with townspeople shape her experience of this place, and what are the emotions that are coming up with her? So I understand now what you're saying actually, like in a deeper level, like why you kept on talking about history and the way that the townspeople are talking to her, and why you have such empathy for her. Because I feel like you're
Yes,
seeing her as a person journeying through this place and her
yes,
experiences through
yes.
it. Okay, wow. Yeah, that's fascinating. Yeah, I'm so glad you came and we did this together. But okay, so now the question, what does obedience mean to you?
Now that's a tough question, to be very honest, because after everything, even obedience is like we are brought up. I mean, even it's in my house, like,
Hmm.
oh, you listen and good will happen to you. If you don't listen, this is what's going to happen to you. I think the Indian culture, the way we are brought up, it's all like that. No, you listen to what your mom and dad says, and everything is going to turn out well and good for you. But again, being a student of narrative practices, like, okay, if we are always being obedient, if we are always listening to others by, um, mellowing down what we want to say or what we want to do, then where is our agency? How does our
Hmm.
identity even develop? Because, when I started reading the book, I really felt that the narrator in question here was a being without identity. She didn't know who she was.
Hmm.
And if we are constantly, again, suppressing who we are, how, in the name of obedience, how are we going to actually have that agency? So, right now, I'm very conflicted in my thoughts on what is obedience. Is it just listening to others, or is it tuning in and listening to how you feel and how your body reacts to a particular situation? Because I think that needs to be given more weightage. Obedience to yourself. How are you responding to a particular
Yeah.
thing? What do you feel about a particular?
Yeah, I think obedience is actually like it's a term that I associate with childhood and how I never understood it. It's a term that I associate with submission and oppression, not necessarily anything that is positive.
Hmm.
Um, and so that's why I feel like, yeah, I mean, the way that I connected with her is how she how she has been molded into this person who who abides by everybody else's wishes, and why I was frustrated also with her that she continues to do so. But I think that there's a deeper layer to it, and yeah, I think that she is a much more discerning character than I made her out to be in the first read. So yeah, but that's it. Anything else you want to add, Denise?
Yeah, and because of the layers and the depth of the character, like so much of it is
Yeah.
exactly the reason why I would want to give this a reread in a
Yeah.
better space. Definitely to understand, the whole purpose, to understand the entire message, especially in view of what's happening right now and how we're going to respond to this oppression.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Denise, thank you so much for
Thanks,
being here with
Meher.
me. Thanks for making this book. It was like a kind of like we made meaning of this book together, I feel.
Yeah.
And so I'm so glad that I did it with you. And yeah, just thank you so much for being here, for taking the time to read this, and thank you
Thank
for
you,
your thoughts.
Meher.
Okay.
Thank you so much. It was so, so lovely doing this with you. I resonate the same.
Likewise, it was so lovely.
Yeah.
And I hope we meet soon.
We will, for sure.
We will. Yeah.
Bye
Take
bye.
care, Denise.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.